The evidence is in the mouth. A crocodile relative's arm bone, wedged between a theropod's lower jaws. Not loose, not nearby, stuck. This is Joaquinraptor casali, an apex hunter, and we're treating this like a case file. 3 clues. No guessing. We test explanations against evidence. Clue 1. The bone is locked where the jaws meet. If it was feeding, that position makes sense. If not, we need another explanation. Clue 2. Those oversized hand claws, built to grab and control prey. And hard prey is risky. One wrong angle, a thick bone can jam. Clue 3. A river world full of croc relatives. So what happened here? Last meal? Or fatal accident? Stay to the end, then vote. A or B. Joaquinraptor lived in Patagonia, near the very end of the Cretaceous. And this fossil is unusually informative for a megaraptorid. Parts of the skull, the arms, and the legs survived well enough to study. But the headline clue is painfully simple. A thick crocodiliform humerus, an arm bone, was preserved right between the 2 lower jaw bones, not near the ribs, not in the stomach area, right in the mouth where feeding happens. That's why this is such a strong starting point, because the location of evidence can be as important as the evidence itself. And this location is hard to explain away. Clue 1 is position. The humerus sits between the dentaries like a doorstop, locked where the jaws close. If the last meal idea is true, we'd expect the prey bone to be inside the mouth. Not just nearby, but trapped in a way that matches real biting and real jaw pressure. Something you can't get from a casual accident or a gentle drift in the water. And that's exactly what this looks like. A heavy bone turned sideways, wedged in tight, in the one place you would expect it if an animal was actively feeding and repositioning something too hard to swallow cleanly. But one clue can fool you, so we check alternatives. Could the bone have washed in after death? For that to work, the jaws would need to be open at just the right angle. The bone would have to slide in, align perfectly, and then lock in place. Without the animal biting down, and without the rest of the skeleton being disturbed in a way we'd expect from transport. Possible? Yes. Nature can be weird. But it's a very specific fit. There's also the darker option, choking, or a feeding injury. The fossil can't show the final seconds, but it does show one thing clearly. These 2 animals met up close, and the encounter ended with a bone stuck exactly where the jaws would struggle to free it. Clue 2 is the toolkit. Megaraptorids aren't built like T-Rex. Their skulls are more lightly built, and their arms are long, with oversized hand claws that look more like grappling hooks than decoration. If this predator took on a crocodileiform near the river, those claws would matter. Because claws can do what jaws alone can't. Grab, control, pin, and hold a struggling target in place. So if Joaquinraptor was feeding, we'd expect a 2-step style. First, secure the prey with the hands. Then, use the mouth for careful, targeted bites and repositioning. That kind of feeding style makes a stuck limb bone easier to imagine. Look at the claw. Long, curved, built to hook and hold. Now picture the bone in the jaws again. If you're holding prey with your hands, your mouth doesn't have to do everything. You can take smaller, controlled bites. You can shift angles. You can tug and twist and try to find the right direction, especially if the prey has thick, stubborn limb bones. By itself, anatomy is limited. Lots of predators have claws, but stacked together with the jaw evidence, it gets stronger. A grab-and-control predator feeding near water, with a croc arm bone locked in its mouth. That combination points toward feeding behavior. Not certainty, but a coherent story that matches the mechanics. Clue 3 is the setting. Late Cretaceous Patagonia floodplains are crocodiliform territory. Ambush hunters in the water, armored bodies, dangerous meal, on land or at the shoreline. And in this region, megaraptorids may have been among the apex predators. Not the Tyrannosaur tank skull approach, but a faster, more agile style, built around reach, control, and precision. So the ecosystem makes the encounter plausible. If croc relatives were common here, then a predator like Joaquin raptor would have opportunities and risks at the river's edge. And the dinosaur itself seems to have been mature, based on bone microstructure, even if it wasn't fully grown. So this wasn't a clueless juvenile. This was an experienced predator, or at least an animal past the most vulnerable stage. If it still ended up with a croc arm bone jammed in its mouth, that makes the accident theory harder to dismiss, because experienced animals can still make one bad bite or misjudge one dangerous struggle. So where does that leave us? Suggestive, not definitive. The fossil pushes us toward feeding, but it leaves enough uncertainty for a fatal mistake. And that tension is exactly why this case is worth watching to the end. So, here's our stack. 1. A crocodiliform humerus physically locked between the lower jaws. 2. A predator built to grab and control prey with massive hand claws. 3. A floodplain ecosystem where croc relatives were part of the landscape and part of the risk. My lean? It probably was eating a crocodiliform, maybe even its last meal. But the fossil also leaves room for a fatal jam or a feeding accident. Now you vote. A. Last meal. B. Choking or accident. Drop A or B in the comments and tell me which clue convinced you most.